He lived alone in a weathered cabin perched against a cliff, the ocean below roaring like a memory that never slept. His only constant companion, a disciplined German shepherd who watched the horizon more than the road. When the retired manager of an old coastal weather station called, her voice thin with urgency about a research lodge that needed checking before the coming king tide storm, she admitted she had a bad feeling she couldn't explain. On the forest road, the dog kept lifting her nose into the wind, never barking, only freezing solid whenever the air shifted direction, as if reading something invisible in the salt-heavy gusts. The lodge stood dark and abandoned. No vehicles, no lights, just the sound of distant waves and wood creaking under pressure from a sky that was closing in. Inside, in the dim hallway, he found her. A young woman with lips turning blue, shaking violently in a broken wheelchair, one wheel twisted uselessly beside her. When he searched the floor, he noticed faint drag marks cutting across the dust. A silent story of someone pulled or placed there. And he made a choice without asking questions. He carried her back to his cliffside cabin, set her near the fire, wrapped her in blankets, pressed hot coffee into her trembling hands. And before we go any further, tell me where you're watching from, and don't forget to like and subscribe to The Last Command K9. The Pacific did not crash against the cliffs so much as slam into them. An endless, furious argument between water and stone. On the Washington Peninsula, winter didn't arrive with flakes drifting politely from the sky. It arrived as wet snow that clung like ash, wind that cut like wire, and waves so heavy they made the ground feel hollow. Declan Voss stood at the edge of his property where the land broke into black rock and white foam, his boots planted wide in the damp soil as if the earth itself might try to shove him off. He was 43, built the way men were built when they'd been trained to carry too much for too long. Broad shoulders under a field jacket the color of olive drab. A strong frame that moved with economy rather than swagger. His face was hard angles and a decisive jawline, softened only by a short, peppered beard that never grew careless. The early silver at his temples made him look older than he was, but his eyes, blue-gray, deep-set, were the kind that didn't belong to any age. They belonged to vigilance. He wasn't hiding out here. That story sounded dramatic, convenient, something strangers could tell themselves to make sense of a man who lived alone on a cliff. The truth was quieter. He'd learned that silence could be a kind of shelter. Not safe, not warm, but stable, predictable. He could stack firewood and mend fences and listen to the weather without having to explain why he didn't answer questions about the past. At his feet, Mara waited without impatience. She was a German Shepherd K9, disciplined, compact, and athletic, with short black and tan fur that stayed dense and sleek even when the wind dragged salt spray through it. There was a steadiness to her stance that felt almost unnatural, like she'd been carved from intent. Her ears tracked every change in the air, her eyes, dark, intelligent, unblinking when she focused, scanned the horizon and the tree line with the same precision Declan used to scan a room. Mara didn't bark to fill emptiness. She didn't whine for attention. She didn't do anything without purpose. She was, in the purest sense, his last honest companion. Declan turned away from the cliff and headed toward the house. The cabin was a low, practical structure built to survive weather, not impress it. Heavy timber, thick windows, a roof that could take the punishment of Pacific storms. His boots left dark prints on the porch boards, the wood wet with a thin glaze of sleet. Inside, warmth hit him like an old habit. Not comfort, not exactly, just heat. He hung his field jacket on a hook, checked the stove, checked the generator, checked the sat phone. He hated the phone. It was the one object in his world that could crack the seal of his solitude. It meant other people, other problems, other suffering he couldn't fix. When it rang, the sound felt like an alarm inside his ribs. Declan stared at it for one extra beat, as if refusing to look at it might make it stop. Mara's head lifted, eyes narrowing, her body going still. He picked it up. Voss. Static hissed. Then a woman's voice pushed through, thin, gravelly, and warm, in a way that sounded earned. Declan? It's Loretta. Loretta Baines was in her 60s, the kind of woman whose face told the story of wind and sun without apology. She was not tall, maybe 5'4", slight in build but unbreakable in posture. Her gray hair was usually braided and tucked under a knit cap, and her skin had the weathered tone of someone who'd spent decades outdoors because she loved it, not because she had to. She ran the old weather station farther inland, a job that had once mattered to more people than it did now. She spoke plainly. And she didn't waste kindness like a currency. Declan didn't have many people in his life. Loretta was one of them. "What's wrong?" he asked, already knowing it wouldn't be good. Loretta didn't call to chat. "The tide's coming ugly," she said. "King tide's pushing in early. The forecast is worse than it looked this morning, and I can't get up to the research lodge." Declan's jaw tightened. The old lodge by the ridge? Yes, the one they used back when they were running coastal instrumentation. It's empty now. But the doors, she swallowed, and he heard the faint tremor in her breath. "I've got a bad feeling, Declan. I drove past the turnoff earlier and thought I saw something. Maybe a light. Maybe nothing. But I can't shake it." Declan looked out the window. Snow fell sideways, wet and thick. The wind made the trees flex like they were trying to bow out of the storm's path. "I can do it," he said. Loretta exhaled relief like she'd been holding her breath for hours. "Just check it. Lock it down. If you see anyone, tell them to get out. That place will turn into a trap when the tide and snow hit together." Declan didn't promise he'd be careful. He didn't say okay. He didn't offer reassurance. He simply said, "I'm leaving now," and hung up. Mara was already at the door before he set the phone down. Declan grabbed his ballo, Eberly stock half-track, worn and functional, and slung it over his shoulder. He checked the pocket knife in his jeans, the old military watch on his wrist, and pulled on his jacket. Everything in its place. Everything as it should be. He didn't want to go. But he was the kind of man who did the thing that needed to be done, even when it cost him. Outside, the truck started on the second turn. The engine's rumble felt like a low argument with the wind. Mara jumped into the passenger seat, rigid and forward-facing, her nose testing the air through the cracked window. They took the narrow road inland, where the trees grew tighter and the sky vanished beneath a lid of gray. The peninsula's forest felt different from mountain woods. It was damp, heavy, old. Everything here held water, even the air. Declan drove with both hands on the wheel, eyes scanning the road and the margins beyond it. Not because he expected trouble, because he couldn't stop expecting it. He tried not to think about the last time he'd ignored his instincts. Tried not to remember the way a single wrong trust decision had changed a mission from controlled to catastrophic. Tried not to picture the moment he realized he'd been fed half-truths. Mara's ears flicked, once, twice. Then she froze, not stiffening in excitement, freezing in that precise canine way, muscles locked, head angled, nostrils flaring. Her gaze cut to the right side of the road where the forest dropped into a shallow ravine filled with wet ferns and black water. Declan slowed. "What is it?" Mara didn't bark. She didn't move. Her body became a warning sign. Declan followed her line of sight and saw nothing but trees and storm. Yet his skin prickled the way it did when a room had a hidden exit. He eased the truck forward again, slower now. Mara stayed rigid, eyes on the ravine until they passed it, then released the tension in a controlled exhale that was almost human. Declan's mouth went dry. He knew that kind of freeze. It wasn't animal, it wasn't random, it was recognition. The lodge appeared through the trees like something abandoned by time, a low structure of dark timber and old metal, set back from the road, half swallowed by brush. There were no tire tracks, no fresh footprints, no lights in the windows. The place looked empty. That was the problem. Declan pulled up and killed the engine. Snow slapped against the windshield in wet bursts. Mara didn't hop down. She stared at the lodge's front door. Declan followed her gaze and felt his stomach tighten. The door was not closed all the way. It wasn't wide open. It was worse than that. Just barely unlatched, as if someone had meant to pull it shut and change their mind halfway through. Declan stepped out. The cold punched through his jacket at the seams. The wind carried salt and pine and something sharp, something chemical. He lifted his chin, sniffed once. Mara was out of the truck now, moving forward with her body low. She didn't rush. She flowed. Declan's hand hovered near his pocket knife by reflex, though he told himself there was no reason. He wasn't armed. He wasn't looking for a fight. He was here to lock a door and leave. Mara reached the porch first, then stopped. Her hackles rose just slightly, enough to change her silhouette. A low sound vibrated in her chest, not a bark, but a warning made of breath and intent. Declan's heart beat once, hard. He stepped onto the porch. The boards were slick with snowmelt and grit. He leaned toward the door and listened. Nothing. No movement, no footsteps, no breathing. But the air that seeped through the crack smelled wrong. Metal, yes, but also something like solvent, industrial, clean in a way that didn't belong in a place this old. Declan set his gloved hand on the knob and pushed. The door swung inward with a soft scrape. Cold rushed out like a living thing. Inside, the lodge was darker than it should have been. The windows were small, and the sky outside had become a sheet of bruised gray. The air was so cold it felt thick. It carried a faint scent that did not belong, expensive perfume, floral and sharp, struggling against the freezing air like a lie that refused to die. Mara slipped in ahead of him. Declan stepped inside and closed the door behind him out of habit, then immediately regretted it. The sound of the latch felt too loud, too final. "Mara," he murmured. She didn't look back. She moved toward the main room, paused silent on the wood, then stopped so abruptly her claws clicked once. An accidental betrayal of how tense she'd become. Declan rounded the corner and saw her. A woman, huddled near the far wall, half hidden by a broken chair and a toppled side table. Her wheelchair looked modern compared to everything else. Lightweight, sleek, the kind that cost too much. One of its wheels was bent at a sick angle, spokes cracked. The woman's hair was blonde, tangled and damp, clinging to her cheeks. Her skin was pale to the point of translucence, lips tinged blue. She looked young, early 30s maybe, slim, with delicate hands that trembled violently as she clutched a thin decorative blanket around her shoulders. Her eyes lifted to Declan, wide with fear that was too real to perform. "Please," she whispered. Her voice was dry, shredded. Don't hurt me." Declan froze. mind flipping through possibilities the way it had been trained to. Stranded renter, staged accident, bait, victim. His gaze flicked over her, over the broken wheel, over the room. Then he saw it, a faint drag mark in the thin dust on the floor, leading from the doorway toward where she sat. Not old. Not from months ago. Fresh enough that the storm hadn't had time to bury the truth, Mara stood between Declan and the woman, head low, eyes locked on her. Not hostile, not protective. Assessing. Declan forced his voice to stay calm, to stay low. "My name is Declan. Loretta Baines asked me to check this place. Are you hurt?" The woman swallowed. Her throat moved like it took effort. I'm Wren Halstead." The name sounded carefully spoken, as if she'd rehearsed it for moments like this. "I had a fight with my fiancé," she said, each word shaking. He left. He took the car. He said I was worthless. He pushed me. The wheel." She gestured weakly toward the broken chair, and her hand trembled so badly, the blanket slid. Declan's eyes narrowed. Her story made sense. That didn't mean it was true. Outside, the wind slammed the lodge's walls. The snow intensified, turning the windows into pale, shifting sheets. The tide, invisible from here, kept its own schedule. Rising, hungry, unstoppable. Declan looked at Mara. The dog's body was rigid, a silent wall between him and the woman. Her lips barely lifted, just enough to show the edge of teeth. An unambiguous message. Something is wrong. Declan felt the old instinct, the one he'd tried to bury under routine, rise like a blade. But he also saw the woman's hands, the way her fingers had gone stiff with cold, the way her breathing hitched, shallow and fast. Whatever else this was, she was freezing. Declan exhaled once, slow. A decision made. "We're leaving," he said. Wren blinked at him, confusion and fear fighting for space in her eyes. I can't. The chair. It's not about the chair." Declan stepped forward, careful, deliberate. "You won't survive here tonight." He crouched, putting himself lower than her eyeline, not as a gesture of comfort, but to keep her from flinching backward. He could see the bruising on her wrist now, the raw red on her palm, as if she'd scraped it on wood. "Listen to me," he said. "I'm going to carry you. My truck is outside. My house is close. It's warm." Her throat bobbed. "Why would you?" Mara made a sound then, a soft, rough exhale. Not approval, not comfort. A warning that time was running out. Declan didn't answer Wren's question. He didn't explain himself because he didn't fully understand it. Maybe it was Loretta's voice. Maybe it was the way Mara had reacted. Maybe it was the simple fact that he still had enough humanity left to refuse to watch someone die in front of him. He slid one arm behind Wren's back and one under her knees. She was lighter than he expected, almost weightless in a way that suggested more than a missed meal. She gasped, startled, but didn't fight. Mara moved with them, tight at Declan's side, head constantly swiveling toward the doorway and the windows. Declan carried Wren out of the lodge and onto the porch just as a gust of wind hit so hard it made the door slam against its frame. The snow came in sideways. The forest blurred. Wren's breath hitched against his shoulder, and he felt her shiver in violent waves. Mara stepped onto the porch first, then turned, planting herself directly between Declan and the lodge's open doorway, eyes fixed on the darkness inside. She didn't attack. She didn't bark. She simply held the line as if the building itself might lunge at them. Declan tightened his grip on Wren and stepped down into the storm. "Stay with me," he said, more command than comfort. And as he moved toward the truck, he understood one thing with sudden clarity. The storm wasn't the most dangerous thing out here. Something else had been in that lodge, and Mara had smelled it before he ever saw the door. By the time Declan's truck cut back through the trees toward the cliffside road, the storm had matured into something feral. Snow hit the windshield in thick, slanted sheets, melting and refreezing in the corners before the wipers could clear it. The Pacific was no longer visible, only a white blur beyond the skeletal outlines of pine. Wren lay curled against the passenger door, wrapped in Declan's spare wool blanket. Up close, she looked younger than she had in the lodge, early 30s at most. Her features were fine, almost sharp, with high cheekbones and a narrow chin that suggested both delicacy and restraint. Her blonde hair, though tangled, carried the faint structure of someone accustomed to control. She did not look like a woman who lost arguments easily. She looked like someone who had learned to survive them. Mara sat rigid in the back seat, her body angled toward Wren rather than the windshield. She did not blink much. Her ears tracked the woman's breathing, small involuntary tremors that shook her shoulders. Declan drove without speaking. His cabin emerged from the storm like a stubborn fact. Low, practical, timbered to endure. He parked close to the porch, killed the engine, and stepped out into wind that felt like it wanted to erase footprints the moment they were made. He carried Wren inside. The warmth of the cabin wrapped around them instantly. The large stone fireplace already held embers. Declan knelt and fed it split logs with the efficiency of habit. Flames rose in steady columns, painting the room gold against the storm-dark windows. The interior was sparse but intentional. A heavy wooden table. Shelves built into the wall. Tools hung in careful rows, nothing decorative except one framed photograph above the mantel. In it, a younger Declan knelt beside another German shepherd. Bigger, heavier in the chest than Mara, with a scar across its muzzle. The dog's eyes were fixed on the camera with fierce loyalty. Declan's hand rested on its shoulder. There was no caption, no medal, no explanation. Wren noticed it immediately. Declan helped her into a sturdy wooden chair near the fire and draped another blanket over her shoulders. He handed her a mug of coffee, black, unsweetened. He did not ask how she took it. She wrapped her fingers around the heat like she was memorizing it. "I don't feel my legs," she said after a long pause. Her voice had steadied, but something about the cadence felt rehearsed, too smooth for someone in shock. Declan did not look at her right away. He crouched to stir the fire, then finally turned his gaze toward her. "You hit your head?" he asked. "No, a beat. He pushed me. I fell wrong." Her eyes flickered briefly toward Mara before returning to the flames. Mara stepped closer. The dog's movement was slow, deliberate, no rush, no threat. She lowered her head and inhaled lightly near Wren's knee. Wren flinched. It was small, almost invisible, but it was not the flinch of someone with numb legs. It was the reflex of someone who felt something. Declan saw it. He didn't react. The wind struck the cabin walls with a deep, resonant thud. Somewhere outside, something metallic banged against wood in irregular rhythm. The lights flickered once. "Power's unstable," Declan said. "If the line goes, generator kicks in." "How long will this storm last?" Wren asked. 3 days, maybe 5. She swallowed. Trapped. The word didn't need to be spoken. It hovered between them like breath in cold air. Declan stood and faced her fully now. "There are rules here." Wren blinked. "I don't ask questions you don't want to answer," he said evenly. You don't touch what isn't yours. You don't lie. The last word hung heavier than the others. Her eyes hardened for a split second before softening again. I wouldn't. Declan held her gaze long enough to make the silence uncomfortable. Then he nodded once and turned away. He moved into the adjacent storage room to check supplies. The shelves were stocked: canned goods, medical kits, batteries, tools. His life operated in quiet redundancy. He preferred it that way. Behind him, Mara slipped through the doorway. The dog's nose skimmed low along the wooden floorboards. She paused near the far corner of the room, where a section of floor looked no different from the rest. She scratched once. Not playful, not exploratory, precise. Declan turned. Mara. She scratched again, 3 short, deliberate strokes. It was the same pattern she'd used years ago during search operations. Target located. Declan crouched. He ran his hand along the seams of the floor until he felt it. A faint irregularity in the grain. He pressed. The board shifted slightly. He pried it up with the edge of his knife. Underneath sat a compact waterproof case, military grade, dark and scuffed, but intact. Declan stared at it for a long moment before lifting it out. He had not put that there. He opened it slowly. Inside, a plastic access badge stamped with the logo of the Coastal Research Facility inland. A folded drone photograph of a narrow ravine bordered by dense trees. And a small, handwritten note. The ink was pressed hard into the paper, as if written in urgency. Don't trust anyone who arrives by helicopter. The room felt colder. Declan didn't believe in coincidences. He stood and carried the case back into the main room. Wren looked up when he entered. The firelight sharpened the angles of her face, revealing tension in her jaw she'd been trying to mask. Declan placed the case on the table without comment. Her eyes dropped to it. Recognition flared and vanished too quickly. What is that? She asked, almost convincingly. Declan didn't answer. He held up the badge instead. The logo reflected orange light from the fire. Her fingers tightened around her mug. For a moment, the storm outside seemed to pause. Where did you find that? She whispered. In my house. The words landed heavy. Her breathing changed. Not panicked, but measured. Calculating. Mara moved closer again, positioning herself between them, head slightly lowered. And then, the lights went out. Total darkness swallowed the room, broken only by the fire's dull glow. In that instant of black, before the generator could hum to life, Mara let out a low, sustained growl. Not toward Wren, toward the window. Both humans froze. There was nothing visible beyond the glass but snow and night. Yet Mara's body went rigid, ears pinned forward, eyes locked on something neither of them could see. For 3 long seconds, the only sound was wind and the deep vibration in her chest. Then the generator kicked in. Light returned. The window showed nothing but storm. Mara stopped growling, but she did not relax. Declan walked to the window slowly and scanned the tree line. No headlights, no figures, no movement. He felt watched anyway. He turned back to Wren. Talk. She stared at the fire, not at him. My name is Wren Halstead, she said quietly, and I didn't come here for a vacation. Her posture shifted. No longer the helpless victim, but someone bracing for impact. My fiancé isn't just some angry man, she continued. Gideon Crane. The name sat in the air like a dropped blade. He's on the board of the company that funds the Coastal Research Facility. I was supposed to marry into that world. Declan's expression didn't change. He doesn't like loose ends, she added. And what are you? Declan asked. Her eyes met his, steady now, a loose end. The fire cracked loudly, startling neither of them. "I went to the lodge to meet someone," she said. "A technician. He found something in the facility's shipping manifests. Something that didn't belong. He said if anything happened to him, there'd be a backup." She glanced at the waterproof case. Declan's jaw tightened. "You hid it here," he said. She hesitated. "I thought the storm would keep me safe long enough to retrieve it." "And the wheelchair?" Silence. Wren inhaled slowly. "The wheel is broken. That part is true." "And the rest?" Her eyes flickered, but she didn't answer. Outside, thunder rolled across the water. Declan picked up the badge and turned it over. "If someone's coming by helicopter," he said, "this storm won't stop them." Wren's face drained of color. "He will," she whispered. Declan studied her. He didn't see hysteria. He didn't see manipulation. He saw fear layered over resolve. Mara stepped away from the window and moved to stand beside Wren, not touching her, but close enough to register heat. The dog's posture softened by a fraction. Declan noticed. He walked back to the fire and fed it another log. "You're here now," he said evenly, "and we're snowed in." Wren swallowed. "Are you going to make me leave?" Declan looked at the photograph above the mantel for half a second too long. "No," he said. He met her eyes again. "But in this house, the truth matters." The wind roared louder, as if punctuating the statement. Wren's lips parted slightly. In the shifting firelight, her face lost its practiced composure. And in a voice barely louder than the storm pressing against the cabin walls, she whispered into the dark, "Gideon Crane." The name felt like the beginning of something that would not end quietly. The fire burned steady. Mara did not take her eyes off the door. The storm settled into its second day with a violence that no longer surprised the walls. By morning, the sky outside the cabin had turned the color of old steel. Snow packed itself against the windows until the world beyond looked erased. The Pacific was gone from sight, replaced by a low, constant roar that traveled through timber and bone alike. Inside, the fire burned steady. Declan moved through the cabin with the quiet rhythm of someone who had learned to survive long stretches without speech. He added wood to the stove, checked the water reserves, ran the generator for a brief cycle to conserve fuel. He did not ask Wren questions. He did not press her for more than she was willing to give. But he listened. Wren sat at the heavy wooden table near the hearth, wrapped in one of Declan's flannel blankets. In the softer morning light, she looked less fragile and more composed. Her blonde hair had dried and fallen into loose waves around her shoulders. Her face, pale but structured, revealed the kind of upbringing that had taught her to keep her chin high even when cornered. She was not a woman raised in fear. She was a woman raised in rooms where power spoke quietly. "My father founded Halstead Strategic Logistics," she said, without looking up. "It started with shipping contracts, government infrastructure, disaster response." Her voice carried clarity now. No tremor, no theatrical vulnerability. After he died, the company expanded into security partnerships, surveillance transport, data routing. You don't get that big without stepping into gray areas. Declan leaned against the wall opposite her, arms crossed. His field jacket hung open, revealing the red and blue plaid shirt beneath. His beard caught the light in rough shadows, making his expression harder to read. "And Gideon Crane?" he asked. Wren's lips pressed thin. "He sits on the board. Public face of reform. Private architect of control." She met his eyes then. 6 months, Ago, a technician from one of our coastal facilities contacted me. He said shipments were moving through a research station under falsified environmental clearance. Containers rerouted, manifests altered. Declan did not interrupt. He told me if something happened to him, there'd be proof. And something happened, Declan said. Wren nodded once. He vanished 3 days after we spoke. The fire cracked sharply. She inhaled slowly. I went to the lodge to retrieve what he said he'd hidden nearby. I wasn't expecting Crane to move that fast. Declan studied her. You hid the case under my floor. Yes. How did you know about this place? She hesitated. Loretta mentioned you once. Said there was only one house along the cliff with backup power and no neighbors for miles. Declan's jaw tightened. He didn't like being part of someone else's contingency plan. I came here first, she continued. But I saw headlights on the ridge road. I panicked. I drove back toward the lodge. And the wheelchair? The wheel was already weak, she said. It broke when I hit the snowbank. And the rest? She held his gaze. I exaggerated. The admission lingered between them. Declan turned away first. Half-truths. They were worse than lies. Years ago, in a desert that carried heat like punishment, he had trusted a source who had offered just enough truth to sound believable. A detail left out. A movement miscalculated. The explosion had taken the K9 at his side before he could process the betrayal. The photograph above the mantel was not sentimental decoration. It was memory carved into wood and glass. He exhaled slowly. You understand why that matters to me, he said quietly. Wren nodded. I do. Outside, wind hurled itself against the cabin like it had personal grievance. By afternoon, the storm thickened again. Snow piled high enough to swallow the lower half of the porch railing. The world shrank to what the cabin could hold. Wren's composure began to fray. It started subtly, her fingers tapping against the mug she no longer drank from, her eyes drifting toward the door whenever the wind shifted. His name was Adrian Vale, she said suddenly. Declan looked up. The technician, she clarified. 38. Tall, dark hair, always nervous around executives. He had a wife and a son. He liked amateur astronomy. Her throat tightened. I keep thinking about his kid. Declan did not offer platitudes. He did not say it would be fine. He had learned that comfort without evidence was cruelty. Mara, who had been lying near the door in a posture of quiet guard, rose and crossed the room. She stopped beside Wren and lowered her head gently against the woman's wrist. Wren froze. Then, unexpectedly, she let out a breath that sounded like something breaking. Her fingers moved instinctively, threading into the fur at Mara's neck. Declan watched. The dog did not shift away. Wren's shoulders began to shake. Not from cold this time, but from something deeper. Her breathing fractured into sharp, uneven pulls. Panic climbed into her chest with ruthless speed. I left him, she whispered. I should have stayed. I should have. Her vision blurred. The room tilted. Before Declan could move, Mara pressed closer, her body firm against Wren's legs. The dog lifted her head and met Wren's eyes directly. For a heartbeat, everything stilled. Wren's breathing slowed. Not because someone told her to breathe, but because Mara's gaze held her steady. It was not sympathy. It was grounding. A silent command. Stay here. Stay now. Declan had seen that look before, on missions when panic threatened to unravel discipline. Mara's eyes were not asking for trust. They were offering it. Wren's breathing evened out. The storm continued to rage outside, but inside the cabin, something shifted. Declan felt it in his chest, a small fracture in the wall he'd built between himself and involvement. He turned away, not wanting her to see that the moment had reached him. Night fell early, though it was hard to measure time without sky. The power failed again, this time without warning. The generator sputtered but did not engage. Ice had likely clogged the intake vent. The cabin fell into shadow except for the fire. Declan moved by muscle memory, adding wood, checking airflow. Wren remained seated near the hearth, face illuminated in flickering orange. "You can sleep in the loft," he said. "I'll stay here." He nodded once. He took a position near the door, sitting on the floor with his back against the wood. Mara resumed her watch beside him. Hours passed in thick silence. Wind screamed. The house creaked. At some point past midnight, Declan opened his eyes without knowing what had woken him. The fire had burned low. Only embers remained. Mara was no longer beside him. He sat up. Across the room, near the window, Wren, beyond the glass. Declan did not move at beyond the glass. Declan did not move at first. He watched the subtle shift of weight in her stance, the way her knees adjusted naturally. No tremor, no instability. She could stand. She had been able to for some time. Mara stood beside her, silent. Declan rose slowly. The floorboards creaked under his boots. Wren turned. For a split second, guilt flashed across her face, sharp and undeniable. Then something else replaced it. Fear. "I wasn't lying about being hurt," she said immediately. "I was lying about how much." Declan's expression did not change. "You thought I'd leave you if you weren't helpless," he said. She swallowed. "I thought if he found me, I'd need time." "Time for what?" "To survive." The wind slammed the side of the cabin hard enough to rattle the window frame. Declan stepped. Closer, but not too close. "You don't get to decide how much truth someone deserves," he said quietly. "Not in my house." She lowered her gaze. "I know." The admission was simple. No defense, no spin. Outside, thunder rolled over the water. Inside, the firelight cast both of their shadows long against the wall. Mara remained between them, not guarding either, just present. Declan looked at the woman in front of him and saw not weakness, not manipulation, but calculation born of fear. He had seen that look before, in soldiers who thought survival required deception. Sometimes it did. Sometimes it cost more than it saved. The storm howled. Wren lifted her chin. "I'm not asking you to forgive me," she said. "Just don't send me back out there." Declan held her gaze for a long moment. Then he stepped back toward the fire. "You're not going anywhere," he said evenly. He picked up another log and fed the embers until flames returned. Behind him, Wren sank, slowly back into the chair, not collapsing, not pretending, just tired. The cabin filled again with steady heat. Outside, the storm showed no sign of mercy. Inside, truth had finally stepped into the room. By the third morning, the storm had thinned from rage to endurance. Snow still fell, but slower now, heavier, like the sky was tired of holding it. The wind no longer screamed. It pressed. The ocean below the cliff was a blur of white violence, but its rhythm had steadied into something almost predictable. Declan had been awake long before dawn. He stood outside in the gray half-light, boots planted in snow that reached mid-calf, measuring the porch steps with a tape he kept in his jacket pocket. His breath came in controlled plumes. His gloved hands worked without hesitation. He had not asked Wren if she needed help navigating the steps. He had not commented on what he had seen the night before. He had simply begun building. The ramp took shape in clean, deliberate lines, planks cut from lumber stacked behind the shed, reinforced with crossbeams he had prepared months ago for repairs he never finished. The angle was shallow enough for stability, the surface sanded rough for traction. He worked with the quiet efficiency of a man who understood that sometimes action said what words could not. Mara stood nearby, her black and tan coat dusted with snow, watching the tree line rather than her handler. She was 6 years old, in her prime, muscles lean and responsive, eyes on alert, but never frantic. She did not interfere. She understood construction as something that required stillness. Inside the cabin, Wren watched through the window. She had wrapped herself in one of Declan's flannel shirts, layered over her own sweater, the sleeves too long, cuffs folded back to reveal slender wrists still bruised faintly from the lodge. Her posture was upright now. No slumping, no performance of weakness. There was tension in her shoulders, but not fragility. When Declan finished securing the final bolt, he stepped back and tested the ramp with his weight. It held. He brushed snow from the planks and walked back inside without looking at her. "There," he said simply. Wren's eyes flicked toward the porch. "You didn't have to," she said. Declan shrugged out of his gloves. "I don't build things I don't mean." The sentence carried weight beyond lumber. Silence stretched between them, thick but not hostile. Wren moved carefully toward the door. She did not pretend anymore. Her gait was steady, though slower than usual, stiff from cold and strain rather than paralysis. She stepped onto the porch and paused. The world beyond was nearly erased. The sea and sky had merged into a single expanse of pale fury. The horizon line was gone. She exhaled. "I hate this part," she said softly. Declan stood beside her, not touching, not crowding. "Which part?" "The waiting." Mara positioned herself slightly behind Wren, not blocking her path, not guarding Declan, just present, observing. Wren gripped the porch railing. "He knows patterns," she said. "Gideon does. He doesn't rush, he tightens." Declan studied her profile. Daylight, her features revealed discipline beneath fear. She was not someone accustomed to being dismissed. "Explain," he said. Wren nodded once. "He tracks movements through contracted security networks. Private teams that don't wear logos. He'll know I accessed the research facility. He'll know I tried to reach Adrian." She swallowed. "He won't assume I ran randomly." The wind shifted direction slightly, cutting across the porch at an angle that forced both of them to narrow their eyes. "He'll calculate," she continued. "He'll look for isolation, limited witnesses, backup power." Declan's gaze sharpened. "You think he knows about this place?" "I think he knows I would choose it." The weight of that possibility settled heavy. Declan leaned his forearms on the railing, staring out at the indistinguishable white horizon. "You didn't just hide evidence," he said evenly. "You used my house as a variable." Wren did not deny it. "I didn't expect you to answer Loretta's call," she admitted. He glanced at her. "You built contingency on an assumption." "Yes." "And now?" She met his eyes fully. "Now I don't know what he'll do." Mara shifted slightly, lifting her head higher. She wasn't growling. She was listening. A faint, irregular vibration trembled through the wooden porch beneath their boots. Not wind, not ocean. Subtle, rhythmic. Mara's ears snapped upward, body tightening, not toward the trees, not toward the cliff, upward. Declan felt it a second later. A low-frequency pulse carried through air rather than ground, too distant to be immediate, too controlled to be natural. Wren's face drained of color. "He doesn't wait for clear skies," she whispered. The vibration faded as quickly as it had begun. The sky remained a solid wall of gray. Declan did not look at her immediately. He looked at Mara. The dog's eyes were fixed on the sky, unblinking. Then the sound dissolved, entirely swallowed by wind. No visible aircraft, no silhouette, just silence thickened by implication. Declan turned slowly toward Wren. "That wasn't imagination." "No." He nodded once. Then he stepped back inside. The cabin felt smaller now. Declan closed the door firmly and secured the latch. He moved to a small wooden cabinet mounted near the kitchen counter and opened it, revealing a handheld radio scanner. He powered it on. Static hissed through the room. He adjusted the dial carefully, scanning through frequencies reserved for maritime traffic, emergency services, and private aviation. Nothing clear. Wren paced once across the floor, then forced herself to stop. "I told you," she said quietly. "He doesn't rush." Declan did not answer. He had spent years in environments where threat did not announce itself loudly. It lingered at the edge of awareness until it decided to act. He placed the scanner on the table and looked at her directly. "You're going to tell me everything now." Wren's jaw tightened. "He has private contractors," she said. "Men who don't appear in records. They move through shell companies. If he thinks I'm unstable, he'll try retrieval. If he thinks I'm exposing him, he'll escalate." Declan studied her face for cracks. Hesitation, deception. He saw none. "You said he tracks devices." "Yes." He extended his hand. "Phone." Wren reached into the pocket of her jeans and handed it over without argument. Declan powered it down immediately and removed the battery. "You should have done that before you reached the lodge," he said. "I thought I had time." He set the device aside. "You don't." The fire crackled sharply behind them. Mara circled once, then lay down near the door, but not fully relaxed. Her head remained upright, ears angled toward the ceiling as if still measuring the sky. Declan walked toward the mantel and paused in front of the framed photograph. Wren followed his gaze. "Your partner?" she asked softly. He did not turn. "Yes." The word carried weight heavier than explanation. "He trusted the wrong man once," Declan continued quietly. "So did I." He faced her now. "I don't repeat that mistake." Wren stepped closer, though she kept distance respectful. "I'm not asking you to trust me," she said. He raised one brow slightly. "Not yet." The honesty of it surprised him. Outside, the wind shifted again, this time pushing from the north. The cabin creaked, but held. Declan walked back to the table and picked up the waterproof case. "You built a trap," he said, "but you don't know who's walking into it." Wren nodded faintly. "That's why I came here." He studied her. "You came here because you thought I wouldn't ask." A flicker of shame crossed her face. "I came here because I thought you'd survive." The words lingered between them. Declan didn't smile, but something in his posture eased, just slightly. He walked back to the porch door and unlocked it again. Wren's brows knit. "What are you doing?" "Looking." He stepped outside alone. Snow continued to fall, though thinner now. The air felt different, charged but not violent. Declan scanned the sky. Nothing visible, yet his instincts remained sharpened. Behind him, Mara stepped onto the ramp without being called, positioning herself at his side. She did not growl, she did not bark. She simply watched the horizon with the patience of something that understood waiting as part of survival. Wren remained just inside the doorway, her hand resting lightly against the frame. For a long moment, none of them spoke. Then, faintly, so faint it could have been mistaken for wind, a distant mechanical thrum threaded through the storm, not close enough to define, not far enough to ignore. Declan's jaw tightened. Wren closed her eyes briefly, Mara's ears locked forward. The sound grew slightly clearer, rotor blades cutting air somewhere beyond the veil of gray. The storm did not stop for it. The sea did not calm, but the world shifted. Declan did not move from the porch. He did not step back. He did not step forward. He simply stood, shoulders squared, as the distant helicopter noise began to separate itself from the wind. The waiting was over. The sound separated from the storm slowly, like something deliberate forcing its way into nature's chaos. Declan didn't look at Wren when the helicopter finally broke through the low ceiling of cloud. He watched the sky. The aircraft came in low over the cliffside, matte black against white turbulence, its rotor blades carving the air with mechanical indifference. It wasn't military. It wasn't marked. It was the kind of helicopter that didn't belong to anyone officially, but belonged very clearly to someone powerful. It circled once before positioning over a narrow clearing beyond the tree line, its downwash flattening snow and whipping branches into violent submission. Wren stepped back inside without being told. Declan did not move. Mara stood beside him, shoulders squared, weight forward but not lunging. Her ears were locked on the machine, tracking every rotation. When the helicopter settled, the world didn't go quiet. It went tense. The side door slid open. The first man out was tall and lean, early 40s, dark hair neatly cut, coat tailored even in a storm. He moved carefully over the uneven ground, not clumsy, not hesitant, but aware of surfaces that did not belong to him. Gideon Crane did not look like someone who raised his voice. His face was sharply structured, clean jawline, straight nose, eyes the color of polished slate. There was no visible anger in him, no panic, only calculation. Behind him stepped a second figure, a man in his late 30s, broader through the shoulders, wearing a heavy overcoat and carrying a leather briefcase. His hair was receding at the temples, and his expression had the tightness of someone accustomed to defending statements rather than making them. The lawyer. Last to descend was the pilot, who remained near the helicopter, scanning the perimeter without emotion. He was built thick, ex-military by posture alone, though he wore no insignia. His beard was trimmed close. His eyes didn't linger on anything unnecessary. Crane adjusted his gloves once and walked toward the cabin. He did not rush. Declan stepped forward onto the porch. Snow swirled between them, caught in the rotor's lingering wake. Crane stopped at the base of the ramp. His eyes traveled over the structure before lifting to Declan. "Mr. Voss," he said smoothly, as if greeting someone at a formal event rather than in the middle of a coastal storm. His voice was calm, controlled, educated. Declan didn't offer his hand. Crane's gaze flicked briefly toward Mara. "And this must be your partner." Mara's body shifted slightly, her chest lowering, lips parting just enough to show the edge of teeth. Crane noticed. He did not smile. "I appreciate hospitality," he continued, "but this situation requires discretion." Wren stepped out behind Declan. Crane's expression did not change, but something tightened in his jaw. "There you are," he said softly. Wren's posture straightened instinctively. Fear flickered behind her eyes, but it did not overtake her. "I'm not coming," she said. Crane tilted his head slightly. "My dear," he replied, "this is not about preference. It's about damage control." The lawyer shifted his weight, opening the briefcase just enough to reveal folders sealed in plastic sleeves. "Ms. Halstead," the lawyer began, voice clipped and professional. "We have documentation prepared regarding your temporary mental state following trauma. It would be advisable to return before this escalates." Declan's gaze hardened. "Mental state?" he repeated. Crane's eyes moved back to him. "She has been under extraordinary stress," Crane said smoothly. "It would be unfortunate if external parties misinterpreted her recent actions." Wren laughed once, a sharp, brittle sound. "You mean you'll say I'm unstable?" Crane didn't deny it. "Brand protection," he replied calmly. "You understand how perception works." Mara stepped forward without a command. She descended the ramp slowly, placing herself directly between Crane and the porch. No lunge, no bark, just presence. Crane stopped. Not dramatically, just enough. For a fraction of a second, his composure fractured, not into fear, but recognition. He had seen dogs like this before, dogs that did not bluff. The lawyer instinctively took half a step back. Crane held his ground, but he did not move closer. In that quiet standoff, something invisible shifted. Declan said nothing. He didn't need to. The storm filled the silence, and Mara's low growl threaded through it like a warning line. Crane exhaled softly. "I see," he said. "You prefer theatrics." Wren moved beside Declan now, her chin lifted. "I prefer truth." Crane's eyes sharpened. "Truth," he repeated, as if tasting the word. "Truth is rarely pure, and never simple." Declan stepped down one step, not threatening, but leveling the physical space. "She's not going to," he said evenly. Crane studied him more carefully now. "You're aware of the implications," he said. "Interference with corporate investigation, obstruction, harboring." Declan's expression did not shift. "This isn't corporate ground." The pilot near the helicopter shifted slightly, hand resting near his jacket pocket, not drawing anything, not escalating, just measuring. Crane looked back at Wren. "You think you're exposing corruption," he said quietly. "What you're actually doing is destabilizing infrastructure that feeds entire regions." Wren didn't blink. "Not with falsified manifests." The lawyer's jaw tightened. "Those documents are proprietary," he said. "Not when they conceal federal violations," Wren shot back. Snow swirled between them again, thick and blinding. Crane's posture straightened subtly. "You're making this difficult," he said. "No," Wren replied. "You are." For a moment, it looked as if Crane might step forward anyway. Mara's growl deepened, still controlled, still restrained. Crane's eyes flicked downward toward the dog, then back up to Declan. "You've chosen a side," he said. Declan didn't hesitate. "I chose my house." That answer hung heavier than threat. Crane looked at Wren one last time. "You are not prepared for what comes next," he said quietly. Wren's voice didn't shake. "I've been preparing my whole life." The lawyer snapped his briefcase shut. Crane gave a single nod. "We'll revisit this under different circumstances." He turned without haste and walked back toward the helicopter. The pilot opened the door. Snow kicked up violently as the rotors accelerated. Crane did not look back. The helicopter lifted slowly, then angled toward the open water before vanishing into the low ceiling of cloud. The storm reclaimed the sky. Silence returned, but it was no longer neutral. Declan remained standing on the ramp until the sound was completely gone. Only then did Mara relax her posture. Wren exhaled, the breath leaving her like something she had held for years. "He won't stop," she said quietly. Declan looked at her. "I know." They went back inside, The cabin felt different now. Not smaller, not larger. Occupied. Charged. Declan closed the door firmly and secured the latch. Wren stood near the hearth, hands at her sides, no longer pretending to be fragile. "Why didn't you send me with him?" she asked. Declan met her gaze. "In here," he said slowly, "there are no contracts." He walked past her toward the table, placing the waterproof case in the center. No leverage, no optics. He looked back at her, eyes steady and unflinching. Only truth. The fire crackled softly behind them. Mara settled near the door once more, head high, listening. Outside, the storm had not ended. It had simply changed shape. The storm did not end in a single dramatic sunrise. It thinned. Snow loosened its grip on the trees first, then on the porch railing, then on the road that carved a narrow scar through the forest. The sea lost its violent white and returned to a darker, steadier rhythm. The world did not forgive what had happened. It simply moved forward. 3 days after the helicopter left, the sky finally opened. Wren stood at the edge of the ramp Declan had built and looked out over the cliff one last time. She wore the same borrowed flannel shirt layered beneath her coat, hair pulled back loosely at the nape of her neck. There were no theatrics in her posture now, no performance of weakness, just a woman who had decided. "I can't stay," she said. Declan nodded once. He had known that before she did. Inside, on the heavy wooden table, lay a letter in Wren's handwriting. Neat, controlled, the pen strokes deliberate. She had written it the night before while Declan worked silently in the shed. The paper held everything she had not said out loud. The falsified manifests, the offshore accounts tied to shell corporations, the containers rerouted through the research facility, the disappearance of Adrian Vale. But it also held something else. An admission. She had written that she had lied about the extent of her injury because fear felt safer than trust. She had written that she had used Declan's isolation as an advantage. She had written that she had learned something about consequence in that cabin. The letter was not for the public. It was for him. "I contacted Elias," she said quietly. Declan leaned against the porch post, arms folded. "Elias who?" "Elias Hargrove." The name carried weight in her tone. "Former federal prosecutor," she continued. "Late 50s. Tall, silver hair, worn down the sides but thick on top. Clean-shaven, always in dark suits, even when unnecessary. He left the U.S. Attorney's Office after a case involving private security contractors collapsed under political pressure." Her jaw tightened slightly. He doesn't like being embarrassed twice. Declan studied her. "And he's taking this?" "He asked for documentation." "You gave it?" "Yes." Declan didn't ask if she trusted Elias. He understood what it meant to place evidence in someone else's hands. "You'll be a target," he said. "I already am." There was no arrogance in her voice. Just fact. Mara stood between them, watching Wren with steady eyes. The dog did not whine. She did not block the path. Wren crouched slightly and placed a hand against Mara's shoulder. "Stay sharp," she murmured. Mara leaned forward briefly, nose pressing against Wren's wrist. Then Wren stood. She didn't look back as she walked down the ramp. Declan did not call her name. The truck she had arranged arrived an hour later, an older gray pickup driven by a man who did not speak. He was broad, bearded, perhaps mid-40s, wearing a thick jacket and mirrored sunglasses despite the overcast sky. His expression was neutral, but his eyes tracked the tree line constantly. Private transport. Wren climbed into the passenger seat without hesitation. The truck disappeared down the forest road, swallowed by branches. Silence returned to the cliff. Weeks passed. The ocean shifted color with the season. The snow melted entirely. Moss deepened in shade. Declan returned to routine. He repaired fence posts, cut wood, checked traps along the tree line for signs of intrusion. Not animals, but humans. He did not speak Wren's name. He did not burn her letter. He placed it in a drawer beneath the table and closed it. One afternoon, a white envelope appeared in his mailbox. It bore the insignia of Pacific Crest Federal Bank. Declan carried it inside and slid it open without ceremony. The letter was brief. The outstanding balance on his property mortgage had been paid in full through a registered legal trust. No conditions attached. No lien transfers. No ownership changes. Zero owed. He read it twice. His jaw tightened. He walked to the fireplace, the paper crumpling slightly in his grip. Mara lifted her head, watching. Declan tossed the letter into the flames. It caught quickly. But the paper curled in on itself and did not burn entirely. The edge blackened, but the central print remained legible. He stepped forward and pulled it out with tongs. The firelight flickered against the words, "No residual claim. No retained equity." He stared at the sentence for a long moment. Then something shifted in his expression. She hadn't purchased the house. She had severed the bank's hold on it. He walked to the window and looked out over the cliff. This land was the only inheritance he had chosen. It was not something he would sell. It was not something he would owe. He exhaled slowly. Behind him, something rolled across the floor. Declan turned. A small red object rested near Mara's paws. He frowned. He had not seen it before. He bent down and picked it up. A rubber ball, bright red, durable, weighted. Along one side, faint lettering had been engraved. "Trust is a trail." Declan's fingers tightened around it. He set it down sharply. Mara nudged it immediately. It rolled. She chased it once across the wooden floor, then returned, tail not wagging wildly, but moving in short, satisfied motions. Declan looked away. He hated the ball. Not because it was red, because it represented memory, because it meant she had thought of the dog, not him. For days he ignored it. Mara did not. Every afternoon she would nudge it toward him, set it near his boots, and wait. He refused. Eventually, one evening, after a long day of clearing fallen branches, he picked it up and tossed it once toward the far wall. Mara caught it mid-bounce and returned, placing it directly into his palm. Her eyes held his steadily. He exhaled through his nose. "It's just a ball," he muttered, but it wasn't. It was acknowledgement. Over time, the symbol dulled. The red faded slightly from exposure to sunlight. The engraving remained. The anger attached to it began to thin. Late one afternoon, as the light shifted gold across the trees, Mara froze near the edge of the yard. Not toward the cliff, not toward the road, toward the forest path that curved inland. Her body went rigid, ears forward, eyes locked. Declan stepped outside. "What is it?" Mara did not move. She stared at the tree line, unblinking. There was no vehicle, no visible figure, only the subtle suggestion of something beyond sight. Declan felt it then, a prickle along the back of his neck, the kind that preceded movement. After a full minute, Mara relaxed slightly, but she did not look away from the path. Declan's gaze followed hers. The forest had been empty, but it no longer felt that way. Days continued. The bank sent confirmation paperwork. Declan filed it. He did not call anyone. He did not thank anyone. But when he stood on the porch now, he felt something different beneath his boots. Ownership. Unencumbered. He did not know whether Wren had succeeded with Elias Hargrove. He did not know if Adrian Vale was alive. He did not know whether Crane had retreated or recalculated. But he knew this. The house was his. Free. Mara lay near the door, head resting on her paws. The red ball sat beside her. At least once a day, she would rise and walk toward the forest road, stop and stare. Not anxious, not afraid. Waiting. Declan leaned against the porch railing and followed her gaze. The wind moved through the trees in low whispers. He did not speak. He did not hope. He simply watched. And when Mara went still again, fully, deliberately still, eyes fixed on the path disappearing into the woods, Declan understood that whatever had begun on the night of the storm had not finished. Not yet. Spring did not arrive gently. It arrived in mud. The snow that had once sealed the world in white loosened into heavy slush, then sank into dark soil. The ocean lost its sharp winter rage and settled into a deep, tidal rhythm that seemed older than memory. Sea fog rolled inland at dawn, thick and salt-heavy, sliding between the trees like something alive. Declan noticed it in the fence posts first. They leaned differently in wet ground. He reset 2 of them that morning, boots thick with clay, sleeves rolled back despite the chill. Mara stayed close but not underfoot, pacing the perimeter in slow arcs. Her coat had begun shedding its winter thickness. Strands of black and gold clung to the porch steps. The red ball sat near the door. Declan didn't look at it. He didn't need to. He heard the truck before he saw it. An engine older than comfort. Slight misfire in the idle. Tires grinding cautiously through softened earth. Declan straightened, but didn't reach for anything. Mara's head lifted, ears forward. No growl, just attention. The pickup that came into view was a faded blue Ford from the early 2000s, dented along the rear panel, tailgate scratched deep enough to expose metal. No tinted windows, no visible escort. It stopped 10 yards from the ramp. The driver's door opened. Wren stepped out. She wore no tailored coat, no polished boots, just dark jeans, work shoes, a simple olive jacket, and her hair pulled back without effort. There were faint shadows beneath her eyes. Not cosmetic, earned. She looked smaller without corporate armor, but steadier. She closed the truck door gently, almost respectfully, as if aware she was stepping onto ground that remembered everything. Declan remained near the porch railing. He did not walk toward her. She didn't expect him to. "The evidence went public," she said. No preamble. Her voice carried without force. Elias held a press conference in Seattle. Federal inquiry opened within 48 hours. Cranes. Accounts are frozen pending investigation. Board initiated emergency review. Declan didn't nod. "Crane?" "Under scrutiny," she said. "Not convicted. Not yet." A faint breeze lifted loose strands of her hair. "I resigned," she added. "Board seat, voting power, everything." Declan studied her face for signs of regret. There were none. "Voluntary?" he asked. "Yes." "Why?" She held his gaze. "Because if I stayed, it would look like leverage." That answer landed heavier than she intended. Declan stepped down one plank of the ramp. "I don't take money," he said. She didn't flinch. "The money wasn't for you. It paid my mortgage." "It removed your mortgage?" Silence stretched between them, not hostile, but not soft. "The trust was clean," she continued. "Verified. No claim, no residual ownership. I had Elias review the structure personally." Declan crossed his arms. "You didn't ask?" "No." "Why?" Her breath caught slightly, not in fear, but in the careful choosing of truth. "Because banks are quiet chains," she said. You don't see them until they tighten. He held her stare. And you thought I didn't know mine? I thought you deserved to choose your battles. That struck something old inside him. He didn't respond. Behind them, the sea fog thickened along the tree line. Then, without warning, Mara moved. Not cautiously, not testing. She ran, straight past Declan, down the ramp, across the wet earth, and toward Wren. Declan's breath stilled for half a second. Wren didn't brace. She crouched instinctively. Mara didn't knock her down. She stopped short, tail low but moving, eyes bright, not frantic, deliberate. And then, with quiet certainty, Mara dropped something into Wren's hand. The red ball. Wren froze. Her fingers closed around the rubber surface automatically, but her expression changed. Not into surprise, not exactly. Into recognition, Mara stepped back 2 paces and sat, waiting. Declan felt something in his chest tighten. The dog had not asked. She had chosen. Wren swallowed. She remembers, she said softly. Declan stepped closer. No, he said quietly. She evaluates. Wren looked at him. And? Declan watched Mara's posture, relaxed, confident, unguarded. I'm not good at forgiveness, he said, a pause. But I trust my dog. The sentence hung between them. Not romantic, not dramatic, just final. Wren rose slowly. She didn't smile. She simply stood there, holding the ball, the wind pulling at her jacket. I didn't come back for absolution, she said. Why then? She glanced toward the tree line. Because it isn't finished. The sound of another engine cut through the moment. Different tone, heavier suspension. Declan's posture shifted instantly. Mara stood as well, ears erect. A green Department of Natural Resources SUV emerged from the forest path, mud splattered high along its doors. It stopped near the truck. The driver stepped out. A tall man in his mid-30s, lean but wiry, wearing ranger green uniform with sleeves pushed up. His face was angular, sun-browned, with a faint scar near his left temple. Clean-shaven, sharp eyes. Jonah Pike. His presence carried the quiet steadiness of someone accustomed to being alone in wide terrain. He nodded once toward Declan. Voss? Declan returned the nod. Pike. Jonah's gaze flicked briefly to Wren, assessing without hostility. You're the one from the reports, he said evenly. Yes. He didn't offer judgment. Got something you should hear, Jonah said. Declan gestured slightly. Speak. Jonah stepped closer but kept his voice low out of habit. Search team swept the research facility perimeter 3 days ago. Found disturbed ground along the eastern ridge. Mud compression consistent with a body dragged, not carried. Wren's jaw tightened. Alive? She asked. Jonah met her eyes. No sign of blood saturation consistent with fatal injury. Hope flickered, but controlled. There's more, Jonah continued. Trail leads toward a narrow ravine. Locals call it Gray Hollow. No formal mapping. Too unstable. Declan's expression darkened slightly. Gray Hollow collapses in heavy rain. Exactly. Wren stepped forward. Adrian Vale. Jonah gave a small nod. That's who I assume you're talking about. Wren inhaled sharply. Why didn't you go in? Jonah didn't bristle. Because it's not a rescue zone. It's a liability zone. He paused. And because whoever dragged him there knew it. The wind shifted. Mara lifted her head toward the forest again, nostrils flaring. She didn't growl. She focused. Declan watched the dog closely. Jonah noticed. She always do that? He asked. Only when it matters, Declan replied. Wren looked from the dog to the ravine path beyond the rangered vehicle. How far? 6 miles by foot. 3 if you know the old logging cuts. Declan considered. Mud season meant unstable ground. Fog meant limited visibility. Crane's investigation meant unknown watchers. Wren tightened her grip on the ball. I didn't come here to hide, she said. Jonah folded his arms loosely. Then don't. Declan turned toward the house. He walked to the doorway and paused. Wren watched him. Mara didn't move. Declan spoke without looking back. If we go, he said, we go quiet. Jonah nodded. I know quiet. Wren stepped toward the ramp. No hesitation now, no performance. Declan entered the house briefly and returned with a small pack, practical, not tactical. Rope, flashlight, water, no visible weapon. He stepped past Wren. She fell in behind him, not asking permission. Mara moved first, straight toward the forest path. Jonah walked to his SUV and cut the engine fully before following. The sea fog drifted low behind them. The yard they left looked unchanged. But something in the air had shifted. A direction. A line drawn forward. As they crossed the boundary into the trees, Mara slowed, nose down, reading scent layered into spring earth. Declan glanced once over his shoulder at the house. Free now of bank claim, free of chains. He didn't linger. Ahead, the forest darkened toward Gray Hollow. Mara's ears lifted. The path opened. A dog does not care who you are. It only cares whether you are real. Before we close this story, there is something deeper than conflict, evidence, or redemption. Sometimes the miracle is not in the helicopter leaving, or the truth going public. Sometimes the miracle is smaller, a house that remains standing, a debt that is quietly removed, a person who chooses to come back instead of disappear, a dog that knows the difference between fear and sincerity. In a world full of contracts, power, and noise, it is easy to forget that God often works in the quiet spaces, not through spectacle, but through alignment, through the right person arriving at the right moment, through courage appearing when it is least expected, through a second chance that no one demanded, but someone was brave enough to accept. Maybe the miracle was not the storm ending. Maybe the miracle was that none of them walked away unchanged. In our daily lives, we face our own storms. Financial pressure, betrayal, pride, fear. Sometimes we hold on to anger because it feels safer than trust. Sometimes we pretend to be stronger than we are. Sometimes we think we have to fight alone. But what if grace is closer than we think? What if the reason you are still standing is not just strength, but mercy? What if the people who challenge you are not obstacles, but instruments shaping you into someone truer? A dog does not care about titles, wealth, or reputation. It only senses what is real. And maybe that is how God sees us too. Not by our image, but by our sincerity. If this story moved you, take a moment to reflect on your own life. Who do you need to forgive? What burden do you need to release? What chain can you cut today so that someone else can breathe easier tomorrow? Share this story with someone who needs encouragement. Leave a comment about the lesson that stayed with you. Subscribe to the channel. If you believe stories like this remind us of something greater than ourselves. May God bless you and your family. May He guide your steps through every storm. May He protect your home, strengthen your heart, and place faithful companions in your path. And when you stand at your own crossroads, may you choose truth over fear, courage over pride, and grace over control.